This is Dr. Karen, and you are listening to the Facto Leaders podcast on the B Podcast Network, where I share up-to-date, evidence-based practices, my own experiences, and guest interviews designed to help pediatric therapists, educators, and aspiring school leaders design services that support social, emotional, and academic growth and set kids up for success in adulthood. Whether you want to learn effective strategies for your therapy session or classroom, be an influential leader on your team, or find creative ways to use your skills to advance in your career, I've got you covered. Hey everybody, it's Dr. Karen, and welcome to episode 168 of the De Facto Leaders podcast on the B Podcast Network. Today I'm trying something a little bit different. What I'm doing today is showcasing clips from past episodes that I wanted to revisit for my listeners just because there were such good insights, and I know that in some of my episodes I get into so many different topics with my guests that sometimes the title of the episode doesn't reflect all of the conversation that we've had. And so I wanted to showcase some of these past clips and these past conversations just in case maybe the title of the episode didn't really cover everything and maybe you decided to skip over it because maybe I didn't pull out the part of the conversation that was most interesting to you. So I'm doing this throwback episode today to highlight some past guests that talked about topics relating to mentorship, leadership, employee evaluations, and power dynamics on school teams. The first interview that I'm showcasing is from episode 109, Can My Principal Evaluate Me If They've Never Done My Job? With Eric Makelky, a principal from Wyoming. So we did get into a conversation about employee evaluations in our interview, but the part of the interview that I am going to share today is the part where Eric talked about what it was like for him when he made the transition from a teacher to a principal and some of the things that surprised him about becoming an administrator and some of the things that made him have more of an appreciation for his past administrators once he learned what it was like to be in that role. The second clip is from episode 151, Does Your System Support Your Policy and Your Curriculum? With Jalita Johnson, who is a reading specialist from North Virginia. So in this conversation, the part of it that I am sharing with you today is our discussion about professional development and some things that school leaders need to think about when they're planning PD for their staff. And the part of the conversation that I share is this idea of the system needing to change before the people can change. And what happens when professional development efforts are done in districts where the system is not ready to change. And then we share some ways that professional development can be embedded into the day instead of just one-off seminars and lectures. The final interview is from episode 112, How to Lead Up to Your School Administrator with Jethro Jones, who is a former teacher, principal, the host of the Transformative Principal podcast, which is also a part of the B Podcast Network. In this part of the conversation, Jethro shares the idea of how to make it easy for others to say yes. The specific context we talk about is when you are asking for something from your leadership, such as a therapist or a teacher asking for something from their school administrator. And Jethro gives a couple examples of how you can make it easy to get what you need when you're advocating for yourself and your profession. So it really ties in with the idea of professional development, or really just asking for any type of system change that you need in your position if you are a therapist or a teacher or someone else who is supporting students. And we also share how you can leverage the influence that you do have in your current position. And this is even if you aren't in an official administrative role. Be sure to check the show notes for links to all of these past episodes. And also check the show notes for the link to Language Therapy Advanced Foundations, my program that helps SLPs create a system for language therapy. And actually, I've gotten some questions recently about if this program is only for SLPs. And so my answer would be that yes, the framework was originally designed to help SLPs, but other people who are involved with language and literacy intervention are welcome to check it out as well. To learn more about the program, you can go to drkarenspeech.com/language therapy. Now, please enjoy this episode. Episode 109 with Eric Makelky. I'm curious if there was something that, like, what was different when you made the transition from teacher to administrator? What things surprised you about the role of being in a leadership position?
It felt a lot like being a first-year teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I came in confident, believing in my own abilities to do the job, and the reality of the job compared to what I was prepared for was very different.
Mm-hmm.
I felt I had a great master's program and a great internship experience and stayed in the district that I had taught in when I became an administrator. So I felt like I had my feet under me, but there were so many things, usually problems, that I had no idea administrators dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no manual, there was no, book on, well, when this happens, do this. And I definitely felt less prepared that first year. It was really a struggle. And looking back on it, I also recognize, oh man, there were so many things that I could have handled better, but I just didn't know what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I did the best I knew how. And similar to being a first year teacher, where you're really focused on yourself and being prepared and being organized and trying to take care of business in the classroom. But kind of that imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
I really remember it took until about end of year 2, maybe halfway through year 3 as an administrator, I felt like I wasn't pretending to be a leader anymore. Like even telling people, yes, hey, I'm the principal, felt like I was like stealing someone's identity. I wasn't confident in myself. And I really felt like, man, any day they're going to find out I don't know what I'm doing and make me go back to being a teacher.
Yeah. I've thought about that when a couple times, I'll hear things in professional groups I'm in where it's, oh, we have a new principal this year and they're telling me to do this, this, and this, and it doesn't make sense. And I just wonder what would happen if you just went and talked to them and, maybe had a conversation with them and share a little bit about what you do. And just, I always think, they probably are telling you to do that because they're in a new principal job. They're trying to figure out the lay of the land. They're probably really not thinking about you as specifically as you think or whatever it is. So That's always my thought. What are some specific problems that came up for you that you never would have realized when you were in the classroom working directly with students?
Probably the most stressful and worrying for me were like personnel issues.
Mm-hmm.
As a teacher, you really only see your colleagues in the hallway and in the teacher's lounge and in staff meetings. And you kind of assume everybody else teaches like you and, does what you do. But when you become an administrator, you see the spectrum of professionalism and you know, organization and putting work in and how kids are treated in the school. You see a lot of great examples of that, but then you see some really poor examples. And those situations were difficult. And I felt pretty unprepared, like, man, what do I do? This teacher's doing this and that shouldn't really happen. And how do I handle it? And trying to find a balance of, growing teachers and giving teachers feedback, but also not tolerating non-negotiable behaviors, adult behaviors.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting because I mean, now that I think about it, where it's a lot of times people who are, I guess, sometimes unintentionally, when people are in their silos thinking about, here's what I need to do with this group of students that's in front of me, whether it's the whole classroom or whether it is a special service provider like SLP, social worker, psychologist, or somebody who's working with kids in a smaller group setting, where you wonder just why the principals are making decisions that they are, or why just how it all trickles down and affects each other. And I think that sometimes that can be really hard when you are just focused on, this is what's going on in front of me, and to realize that, wow, like there's so much going on, and there's so many moving parts that are impacting how the leaders are making their decisions. Were there any things that made more sense for you once you got into that role, where it was like, oh, this is why they do what they do?
Yeah, I think when you become an administrator, you see all these different forces pushing and pulling in different directions, federal mandates, state mandates, school district mandates, superintendent mandates, parent and community beliefs, and all of that kind of has to get filtered through the leader of the building, and then comes out as, new initiatives, new programs, new focus, new curriculum. And as a teacher, you're really, especially if you have a good building administrator, you're really isolated from that.
Mm-hmm.
And you just kind of assume like, oh, this is the principal's thing that he or she's making us do. But when you become the administrator and you get those emails and go to those meetings and hear about all those competing interests and mandates, that made a lot more sense, where it's like, oh, that's why sometimes principals feel like they're switching directions, or, oh, a new school year, a new shiny object thing,
Yeah.
That's what makes it difficult, I think, to have consistency in a school, is year after year, those mandates can change and priorities can change at levels higher than just the principal's office.
Mm-hmm.
So that made a little bit more sense to me. And it also made me really empathize with past principals. Like, oh boy, this is tough. You can't just tell teachers every time you get an email, we're doing this. You have to kind of filter out. And really, I think about good principals do two things. They wear a bulletproof vest and try and protect teachers from some of those shots that, especially recently, people take at educators, and keep that off of their plate. And the other thing is try and remove some obstacles that are in the way of good teachers that are trying to do things, whether it's funding or policies or time in the day. Just get out of the good teacher's way and let them work their magic and help them solve problems that are holding them back.
Yeah. I think that was one of the building principals that I worked with, for actually the person who hired me for my job that I had as an SLP for 14 years was really good at that, especially being the shield. There were so many times when teachers needed support, like a parent was asking them to do things that weren't reasonable, and they were getting bullied, and she would literally, it was so many meetings where she would let the parents or whoever it was, she would take it if they would say things to her that weren't very nice. But the minute they started saying anything to the teachers, it was like, hey, you don't talk to my staff that way. Mm-hmm. And this is just setting boundaries and again, kind of being the buffer so that the teachers could do their jobs. And then also just that what she was really good at was empowering people and letting them do their thing when she knew that they knew what they were doing. Episode 151 with Jolita Johnson.
The system has to be primed and ready for change in order for it to happen. And so what I realized in making my decisions and, making sure that I'm spiritually connected to that choice and decision, but it was that the system that I was in originally was not ready. They did not see the need for the change, and it's always going to be reactive. When I noticed, okay, well, what made that district different than this district in the same state? What made those two districts different than these two districts less than, 20 minutes apart in the same state? And it's all about the way in which the system is perceiving the root cause. And that is one of the biggest eye openers that I've had, even in this George Mason Ed Leadership program. It's the idea that a system has to view the end user as the teacher, not the student, because what we'll see is a lot of purchasing and implementations of resources and programs and ideas for the student's sake, but not build the capacity of the true end user, which is the teacher or the educator. And so having that be the focus in Missouri, even in the district that lost its accreditation, we were able to have a budget every year to go and receive PD at different conferences. They would pay for, travel and lodging, and allow us to come back and share what we've learned. So they created that space in those two districts in Missouri that I don't quite see just yet in Virginia, or at least the two districts that I've been in. And I think that even though it seems small, but I think that was probably one of the biggest shifts that I had to notice, because right now we only have one PD day in the entire school year.
Yeah.
Where in Missouri, it was a part of our monthly schedule. Every school in the district had PD day where every student was able to leave at 12, and teachers had that continuous, and I don't want to say we can't do it here, but being, like I said, being in that leadership course, I can think as a leader and not just a teacher. And I realized that the districts that I was a part of in Missouri were a fraction of the amount of students and teachers and resources that they have to logistically move around to make that even remotely possible here in Virginia.
I wanted to take a quick break here and talk about Language Therapy Advanced Foundations. Language Therapy Advanced Foundations is my program that helps SLPs and other professionals working on language to create a system for language therapy. In this conversation, we're talking a lot about the important components that need to be in place for kids to build their literacy skills, as well as advance in other academic areas so that they can expand their options later on in life. So that's why it's really important that we have effective literacy intervention in place, as well as the other core content areas. And as we are discussing in this conversation, having strong language skills is so critical to making that happen. One of the topics that we've talked about is syntactic complexity and the sentence types that kids need in order to have those strong comprehension skills. Now, many kids catch on to these sentence types and build their syntax skills by exposure, and the standard curriculum is adequate for them. They're able to do well with the standard instruction, but for kids with language disorders or other disabilities that impact language, they need more explicit intervention, and that is when language therapy or other intervention is warranted. And we need to make sure that we're giving them the intensity that they need. And I show you how to create a system for doing that in Language Therapy Advanced Foundations. What this does for you is twofold. One, it helps you to get really clear on your direct interventions. And when you get clear on that piece, it makes it so much easier for you to figure out ways to coach other people. It's very difficult to coach other people if you're not sure what your own personal protocol is. So I help you create that protocol in Language Therapy Advanced Foundations using a framework that narrows things down so that you know that you're being evidence-based, but offers you the flexibility of being able to customize it to your caseload and your district. To learn more about the program, you can go to drkarenspeech.com/language therapy. Now, let's get back to the conversation. That makes so much sense because I can even think of times when people will ask if I can do a PD, and it's like, I have no idea if what I'm going to say is going to be something that the district can implement because I don't really know what's going on there. And yes, you can have a conversation there and do your best. I never think that people going into a district doing PD should just say, oh, I'm not going to do it because, everybody is doing their best and sharing information. And I think that in that kind of a situation, if you maybe make an impact on one person who then maybe moves to another district and is able to get into a situation where they can use that information more effectively or whatever it is. But yeah, that is so important. So what you're saying, though, is that so in one district, there's the system that was in place that helped things to be more effective was regular PD as a habit, and then also the space to talk about it and have that community versus one PD day a year. So in theory, you could bring someone who's an amazing presenter in one situation versus another, and the actual implementation and impact could be totally different.
Absolutely. And thinking about it in another light is that the districts in Missouri, they had that system in place, but the system wasn't necessarily trying to change. Where here in Virginia, the system is desperately wanting to change and evolve, but the resources and the opportunity to make the change through professional development does not exist. I don't know. I haven't been at the district level, so I can't speak in absolute terms. But what I've noticed is that every principal so far has to make it a part of their own school improvement plan to do things like ongoing PD. And I think you had an episode earlier where you spoke to a Catholic school principal, I believe. Mm-hmm. Yep. And he was speaking about the way in which he reframed how teachers do PLCs. And that was one of the things that my principal was able to he was able to bring in John Antonetti. He's the author of Powerful Task Designs, engagement strategies for teachers. And what he was able to capitalize on was, we're not going to be able to bring you in to be this awesome speaker but once. But how can we utilize the system that we have to bring learning alive for teachers? And he simply came one day, and for every planning period, so while the students were in specials, he walked around with every grade level into other classrooms and told them, you turn your back to the teacher and you notice how the students respond. How do they respond? And we came out into the hallway and we were able to dialogue about questioning and teacher wait time and students collaborating together. But that was all during the school day. And those walkthroughs only happened maybe 30 minutes at a time. But the principal was able to see the need in the system and notice that gap existed in terms of PD, but not rest on the idea, we only have one PD day, so we can't, make it work. Yeah. He was able to really figure out a way to facilitate that for teachers and embed it in our everyday, because I think a lot of PDs, like this districts in Missouri, are one-off. So yes,
Yeah.
we'll pay for you to go. We'll pay for you to learn and come back and discuss. But we're not really trying to change, so we can't make it a part of our everyday. Where I am right now, it's like we got to figure out a way to make it a part of our everyday. And so our teachers currently, on a rolling basis, every 6 days, have an hour and a half of planning time on top of their daily 45-minute planning time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that
That's
has
amazing.
been a tremendous shift that I'm experiencing.
That is one of the biggest things that, when I do talk to people in the support provider position as well, where I say, they're like, I understand that I need to be working and collaborating with the teachers, but when am I going to do it? So, and again, it totally depends on how the setup is in your district. Like, for example, in Illinois, we have for SLPs, the caseload cap is 60, but some districts in my state say, well, you know what? We understand that the cap is 60, but we only want our SLPs to have 40 because we want them to be able to provide really good services, which is very uncommon. And I know other districts where a part-time SLP could have 100 kids. So that whole system, again, you could take a really great trainer and give the teachers and the related service providers this amazing information, but then there's not the system to put it in place. Or even if you did do more had PD days more often, it would still be an issue. And I love that the thought or the idea about learning being embedded for adult learners. We talk about that all the time for kids, where it's, we understand that lecture and leave is not a good model for kids. So why are we doing it for the adults? I mean, it should be embedded into the learning as well. Episode 112 with Jethro Jones.
So let's take, for example, a lot of the people that are listening to this are therapists, like speech language or physical or occupational therapists, or in a role where they don't really feel like they have all the information or all the decision-making power. But if you are a speech language pathologist and you go into an IEP meeting and you say, this is what needs to happen for this student, because you are who you are and know what you know, people are going to say, okay, we can probably take what she's saying and go with it. And the thing is, if you actually come with a plan and a strategy for doing what you're trying to do, then nobody's taking the time to think about these things besides you. And so if you have an idea and you have a plan, then you can go with it. So let me illustrate this with a very simple example from my 11-year-old daughter, who is dying to have a phone. She just thinks that it's like the coolest thing in the world and totally wants one. And let me just tell you, there's no way in the world that she's getting a phone. So she feels like she has no power in this situation. So she came to me the other day and she said, Dad, I have an idea from the old flip phone that we have that we used to use when the kids would go to different activities and events and things like that. I'm going out on bike rides with my friends a lot, and I would like to be able to have this phone just to take with me when I go on these things so that I have a way to get in touch with you guys as needed. Now, she thinks like what she really wants is an iPhone, like a lot of her friends have. She's not getting an iPhone. But what she might get is an opportunity to be able to stay in contact with us. And because she is taking control of the situation and saying, I have this idea and I want to do it, she is now taking control and saying, I do have the power to make some decisions. And because I'm suggesting it, then I'm going to be responsible with what I'm asking to be able to do. That's a lot different than me saying, okay, I need you to do this, and so now you do what I tell you to do. She's saying, I'm showing how I'm responsible, how I'm resourceful, and how I have good ideas. And I think that I can do this and make things better for you as parents and better for me. Now, she's 11 years old, but she's starting to figure some of these things out that when you come with the idea, and here's the key. It took me a long time to get to this, but here's the key. Make it easy for someone else to say yes.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one.
It is a big one. If you make it difficult for them to say yes, then they're going to say no. But if you make it easy for them to say yes by coming prepared, having a plan, and putting things in place that make it easy for them to just say, yeah, we can do that, no problem, then you solve a lot of your problems, and you actually do have all the power, because all they're doing is saying yes. They're not saying, let's work on this together and figure it out.
Mm-hmm. That part that you said there, that make it easy for them to say yes. How often do you, when you've been working with people in the schools or healthcare or wherever, where there's some type of a position where there's a leader and then there's someone who is reporting to them, asking for something, or who feels like that they don't have autonomy with something, how often do you see people making it very difficult for those people in the leadership positions to say yes or give them what they're asking for? What are some specific examples that you've seen?
Yeah, this is huge, because so many times people say, I want to do this, give me permission. And what they really need to be saying is, here's how all of this is going to work and how it's going to benefit you. Should I go ahead and do this and give you these benefits, or should I do something else? When you ask the question like that, should I go ahead and give you these benefits? Then it's really easy for someone to say, yes, I want those benefits. Yes, I want to have that happen. It's really a piece of cake. It's not challenging. On the other hand, when you come and say, for example, here's a classic example. A teacher at my school wants to go, or a therapist at my school wants to go to a conference. Mr. Jones, I want to go to this conference, and can I go? And it's like, okay, well, how much does it cost? What are the things you're going to get from it? How are you going to bring this back to our school? Contrast that with the SLP that I had, who wanted to go to a conference, and she said, Jethro, here's this conference that I want to go to. This is how much it costs. There is a grant available that I would apply for, and if I get it, then it would be free. If I present, then it'll be free, so you wouldn't have to pay for that. And the per diem is this, and I would need a sub, but I've actually already arranged all my students to not meet those 2 days, so that I can go to this, and I'll make sure that I get them all in on the rest of the days in the week, so I can still meet their service hours. And if I go to this, then it will help me do this part of my job better, which has been a challenge for us in our school. And here's how it'll be easier. And so all I really need is your signature here to say, yes, it's okay for me to take this time and go do this. Like, okay, like, yeah, it's really easy for me to say yes to that SLP, as opposed to the teacher who's like, I need to go to this conference, and then I've got to do all this work on top of it to figure out whether or not that's worthwhile.
Right. Yeah. That's a really great example, because I know that some people, that professional development and getting access to those types of things that people want to build their skills is a huge thing. And I think that sometimes people think, well, my administrator won't let me do this, or my school only offers this much budget for this much PD. And then they just stop there. And I always wonder, is that really what the rules are? Have you tried? Have you looked for solutions? And I've seen it with PD. I've also seen it with things like with some of the special ed things. And what happens specifically with speech is that sometimes there would be, these are our policies for the special ed teachers, and that how it would apply to the related service providers, like the social worker, the speech pathologist, the psychologist, because their role is a little bit different, but related to teachers, it wouldn't necessarily directly apply. So the administrator is coming here who's kind of taken a first stab at, these are our policies and procedures. It's like a first draft. It's like, I'm going to put this out there because I need to give you some direction on how to do things. And people take that as if it's the final draft and there's no flexibility in it. And when I was in the schools, a lot of times what we would do is, it's like, okay, here's how we want you to do it, but there's all these little nuances that administrator hasn't necessarily taken into account because they haven't been in my role. And a lot of times, if we would just say, okay, I understand why you are recommending this, but what if we did it this way? And then, like you said, here's all of these procedures lined up for us. It's easy for them to say yes or no versus, well, this just doesn't work for me. This just doesn't make sense. And then asking them to do all of that work. So I've seen it that way as well, where sometimes the administrator is thinking about it from one angle and it doesn't make sense, but really there is another way and they would be willing to accept it. They haven't come up with the idea yet because they haven't been in your shoes.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And so especially with someone who is a singleton in a school or work environment where nobody else has that same job, the policies are not written for the singleton. The policies are written for the majority, the mass of people who have the same job. So in this situation, you have to recognize that everything's negotiable, and you should be ready and willing and able to negotiate for what you specifically need. But then there's no way that every policy we have can cover every situation. Mm-hmm. And so finding loopholes and finding ways to get the things that you need to have happen is a powerful way to do it. That makes a lot of sense, but is not always easy to implement because it's so much easier to convince yourself that the other person is going to say no before you ever even give them the chance to say yes. And that's more of a mindset issue than it is a practical issue, because your mind is telling you, I can't do this yet. It's not going to work. They're going to have this reason. And so you just take a couple extra minutes and think through how you answer those questions yes for them and make it easy for them to say yes.
Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to check the show notes for links to all of these past episodes. Again, they were episode 109, Can My Principal Evaluate Me If They've Never Done My Job, with Eric Makelky. Episode 151, Does Your System Support Your Policy and Your Curriculum, with Jalita Johnson. And episode 112, How to Lead Up to Your School Administrator, with Jethro Jones. And if you're interested in learning more about Language Therapy Advanced Foundations, my program that gives speech pathologists and other professionals supporting language and literacy framework for language therapy, then you can check out the program enrollment page at drkarenspeech.com/language therapy. Thank you as always for listening. If you are interested in being a guest, if you have a suggestion for a guest, or if you would like to invite me to be a guest on your podcast, feel free to email me at talktome@drkarenspeech.com. And if you found this episode helpful, feel free to share it with a friend. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.